are applying as a dance major, do you have to write about dance?
Yeah, and that's a good question. And if the question is about dance, if the question is why this program, then absolutely, like Suzanne said, you need to answer the question. Like, don't deviate. Make sure you are addressing what they are asking. However, if you have the opportunity, dance needs to be somewhere in your application. But if it's somewhere else and you have the opportunity to take this particular essay and write about something else, show them something else about you. Give them new information. Like they know you're applying to a dance program, so they know you're a dancer. They know you have passion about dance, that this is something you're very deeply devoted to. They're going to know that already. So if you have the opportunity, show them something else about you. And similar to what Suzanne said, I read a story from an admissions counselor who said the best essay they ever received, best essay, was about how to make a blueberry pie. And the opening statement was, all it takes is a little vodka. Those are the kinds of things that stick out. So like, and you can break that down into showing process, but even like dance, niche down into, don't talk about dance as this big overarching, oh, I'm a dancer, I love dance. Everybody knows that. Side example, I've done a lot of essays for people applying to medical school and medical programs. Every single one of them says, oh, in my childhood, or I went on this youth trip, or I went on this mission trip, and I was, with Doctors Without Borders, and everybody says something like that. And so the point is to bring it down into a very niche experience that only you experienced. Was there a role you didn't get that you felt you were legitimately supposed to get? How did you handle that? Did you support the person? Did you volunteer instead behind the scenes, backstage? Did you break it down and say, okay, I need to work on this particular combination? And how did your thought process, like, get really specific about stuff like that. Make them see what you've done. But if there's an opportunity, like, don't talk about the same thing in multiple places. Like, you don't want to bore them. You want to give them new information and make sure they understand you're a multifaceted person who has other things, because at some point, dance performance you're going to have to transition. Like, you can't perform through your whole life and you can't perform to the same level. So there needs to be other things too in you to show them as to like who you are and what your personality is like. So I think write about it somewhere in there, especially if there's a question related to why do you dance, or why do you love dance, or what do you love about this, or how has it grown you? But if there's an opportunity, give them some. There's a lot there. If you're doing the Common App, then you have your main personal statement, and that's a required part of it. There are some universities that don't really require that part of it, but you have to do it for the Common App anyway. And there's many of them do take that particular thing. So there's that one. Beyond that, there are actually a whole lot of other micro essays and short answer questions. My son, when he was going through one of his applications, they had a top 10 list. Anything you wanted, pick your subject matter as to what top 10, but a top 10 list. And he chose, because he's a blue belt in jiu-jitsu, so he chose takedowns. And so he listed his top 10 takedowns for jiu-jitsu. So things like that. There, I've seen, 25 words or less. I've seen, 50-word maximum. Some of them are 120, some of them are 250. There are required ones and there are optional ones. So obviously do all the required ones, but do at least some of the optional ones too. Because again, this is your opportunity. This is your one opportunity to show them everything you possibly can, because they're not going to talk to you before this point. Like, this is their first impression of who you are. Use all those opportunities to show them things about yourself in different ways. And yes, answer the questions. I don't think all of them are 100% necessary. There are some where I've heard, admissions counselors like, oh, well, I look to see if they've done the optional questions. If they didn't do the optional questions, I'm going to throw them out. Like, then they're not optional, and that's deceptive. That's disingenuous. But there is something to showing that you go above and beyond, showing that you are giving things that aren't necessarily required. That shows something about your character as to how you approach problems or how you're going to approach an assignment. But again, I think the biggest thing is that these are opportunities and they're missed opportunities. And if there was something else you could have told them that would have changed their mind and you kind of let that go, you're never going to know about it. So go ahead and take it, because again, the worst that's going to happen is you're going to get rejected from the school.
Right.
So at least give them your best and your fullest application as much as you can. And some of them will have optional supplemental things on the actual university page that are not listed in the Common App. So you really do need to make sure you're checking both places to see, okay, are there other things I can send in addition to what they're going to get on the Common App? So, but if it's an optional selfie video, that's your opportunity to answer one of their prompts and show them and let them hear you talk.
Mm-hmm.
And those things are powerful. So especially in these vast seas of all these tens of thousands of applicants, you want to stand out.
Right.
In every way you can. And that's what these are designed to. And I think one of my students had, and I want to say it was for UNC Chapel Hill, one of the questions was, if you could travel anywhere, past, present, future, and talk to anybody, who would it be? And it was talking through that with her, because she said something, and I'm like, but this is one of those questions where you can get really, really, really hyper unique. And in talking with her, I said, do you want to know what my answer would be? And she said, what? I said, well, back in the day, one of my ancestors was kicked out of England because he was part of a plot to overthrow Oliver Cromwell's government. So it was either that or beheading. So that would have been my answer, to say, I would like to go back and talk to this person. Something along those lines where nobody else is going to say something like that, So those are the kinds of opportunities you get to be memorable and to stand out in your applications by these questions. I think avoid talking about anything that makes them doubt your ability to handle adversity or challenge. And I've heard both ways on, do you talk about mental health, or, when you went through a really extreme mental health challenge. And my perspective is, I think it's okay to mention it in passing as part of, I'm doing all those things and it also benefits my mental health, rather than hyper focusing on this, because you don't want to make them think if you get onto this campus, you're going to have another period of time where this is a really big struggle for you, because then that affects everybody around you. It affects the program, it affects your ability to engage in your education, and do you stay? So then there's, retention questions there too. So, I think it's better to focus on things that made you stronger, or things you learned, or how you faced and overcame a challenge or a failure by working through this, to where you came out stronger and better on the other side. And I think there's also, and I think from the perspective of someone like me who works with a lot of people who do these kinds of things, I tend to see very common topics. And so you want to stay away from what everybody else is going to say on this particular topic, especially when you're talking about one activity like dance, or like these medical program students who I've gotten. One student I worked with, she went through it. Technically, it's pageant. So it used to be the America Junior Miss pageant, but now they call it Distinguished Young Women. So at one point, they gave all the contestants a question that they then had to answer literally on the spot. They had, like 90 seconds or whatever to answer this question. And the question had something to do with the most important thing to you. I don't remember how they phrased it, but it was something along those lines. And literally, better than 90% of them all said something about their grandparents. picture from my grandparents, a necklace or something my grandparents gave. Like literally everybody talked about the same thing. And by, 6 or 8 of those, they all blend together. Nobody stands out. It's the same answer. You don't want to listen to it anymore. And so that's where, when I'm working with these students and talking about it, and I just ask questions and ask and ask and ask until you find the thing, you're like, oh, that's a great story. Tell me more about this. Because nobody else is going to speak to this particular experience. And so those, I think, are the things I would say to avoid. And I know a lot of people talk a lot about mental health, and, there's a lot of reality and openness, which I think is very positive, to say, okay, these things affect your mental health. You need to take care of this. I went through this low phase, and it's not the best narrative to then show them your strength, because I think it's then going to open up questions about, if you came into this type of struggle again, would you be able to mentally handle this or emotionally handle this? So I think focusing on mental health like that in your essays probably not the best